Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. I'm Robin.
I'm Jenna.
And today we'll be discussing Chapter 2, The Mallrats. So listeners, Heidi will be back for Chapter 7 and 8, The Bite and the Battle of Starcourt, respectively. But I will, this season, have a rotation of new and awesome co-hosts to join me until then, because while doing Season 2 by myself was fine, it was a little lonely. So I want to try to do this season with more people. We wish that Heidi could be here, but her life is still pretty busy. So for today's episode, welcome Jenna.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm so excited.
I'm really happy to have you here. So Jenna and I go way back. We went to the same college, actually the same one as Heidi, in fact.
Yep.
We made our first film together after college, and then we've stayed in touch ever since. So Jenna, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your history and background with Stranger Things.
So as you just said, Robin, I did go to film school with you, and I do have a background in the, film, being really interested in film. And with Stranger Things, though, I am kind of like Heidi, like I watched it when it came out and I thought it was really good, and that was pretty much it. I will say that after season 2, I didn't really have the itch to start season 3 when it came out. So that's why I only just watched it within the past few weeks. Season 2 didn't really end on a cliffhanger or anything. It kind of wrapped up nicely, so maybe that's why. But I still definitely enjoyed season 2, and I did enjoy season 3 as well. I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm actually, that's one of the reasons that I was particularly excited to have you on, and actually a couple of other people that are going to be showing up this season too, is that I think that'll generate some really good conversation as we go. So with that said, our coffee selections for today, it's a little boring for me today, but I had a gift card for Starbucks, so I went and got myself an Americano this morning.
Oh yeah, when you get those gift cards, you got to use them.
Mm-hmm.
I myself am drinking something even more boring. It's a Starbucks vanilla Frappuccino drink from the grocery store. So
Those were delicious.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. And I promise this episode is not sponsored by Starbucks, although it sounds like
No.
it is. Well, now that we've acquired coffee, let's proceed with contemplation. We pick up sort of where the last episode left off, inside that barn, which is first very quiet and empty. I actually did really like the sound design of that. And then we get a jump scare. That's what it is. It's a jump scare when Billy pops out and makes a run for it. And he gets back in his car, drives down the road, finds the payphone, and then after a few flashbacks, fill us in, featuring what looks an awful lot like an alien-style face hugger attack. Billy finds himself in what we know to be the Upside Down, and Billy shouts, "What do you want?" at an approaching crowd. And then a copy of himself steps forward. I think it was kind of like that was the question that I was really interested in immediately. What's going on? But also, what does the Mind Flayer want at this point?
Yeah, my reaction to this scene was just sheer confusion and just, first of all, how does his car start? Like, he had such a problem with it at the end of the last episode, and it started right away. Like, okay, fine, whatever.
That's a really good point, though, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I was honestly a little bit disappointed to see Billy hadn't just died at the end of episode 1. And I might be in the minority on that. I enjoy Billy as a character from season 2, but I was so grossed out by him and Karen in the last episode before this one that I was just like, you know what? Let's just kill him off and not even have that be a thing anymore. And that would be fine with me. But I really enjoyed Dacre Montgomery, so I'm not that sad that he came back. Like, okay, fine. Oh dear, we'll have more of him. But I was still confused was my number one emotion through this sequence because the questions that I had watching it the first time have still not really been answered. Like, what the hell is happening? Period.
Yep.
But this is the first indication that we get that the Mind Flayer may not be mindless, because it talks back to Billy kind of sort of in, I was really thinking at first that Billy literally had a doppelganger that was going to be moving around in the, real world, and that wasn't really him, but that isn't the case as it turns out.
Yeah. What do you want?
And we still don't know.
We still don't know. It was really funny to like go into the title sequence after that. It's another one of those like really short cold open sequences. And 11 calls Mike when he doesn't show up.
Mike is a terrible liar, by the way.
Yeah, he flounders through that conversation. It's funny because Lucas asks him later, like, I wish you had consulted me. And I'm like, why didn't you?
I love that line too. The way he says it is so good. It's so funny. But and also I just thought Mike would be smarter. I understand he'd be flustered lying to Elle because that feels like cardinal sin. And like you guys were saying, a theme of the season is change, but there really wasn't a transition for him to be this character. It's just all of a sudden he has a girlfriend and he is dumb. That's it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, fine if you want to do that, but give me some context as to why. Show me how, or show me why, or give me some. And that's kind of what I meant in that I think a few changes to that chapter 1, rather than just showing Mike and 11 making out all the time. Give me something else, just a little bit more that might contextualize how we got here.
This episode for sure, but definitely this ramps up for me in the next episode. There is some suspension of disbelief that is doing a lot of work in this season, like more so than the previous ones.
Oh, yeah. It's like we're just supposed to go with it, but I just don't. It's too jarring. Especially if Mike's whole deal, as Heidi theorized last episode, is that Mike and 11 are behaving the way that they do towards Hopper because they're still resentful. Why does he not tell 11 the truth here?
I think it's supposed to speak to how scary Hopper really is and how unhinged he is. I mean, that's a whole other thing too.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mike really is scared of him.
There's just it's messy.
It's not consistent.
Mm-mm. After the phone call, we get the replay of "You don't mess around with Jim," and this was where he goes to tell Joyce the good news. And like when he says, "This is the first day in 6 long months that they have not seen each other," either he's exaggerating or they really didn't think that line through. Because what? Mike never had to go home and do his homework?
Maybe it doesn't mean literally, but I think Hopper's trying to say this is the first time in 6 long months they haven't seen each other that they could have seen each other. Something like that
Yeah.
maybe. But no, it's more the triumphant, smug tone that makes me wanna, like, just smack him upside the head. Like, "What is wrong with this man? He is a bitter old man who hates joy." I forget who says that. One of them says that later, but, like, yeah, he that's exactly what's happening here, and, like, it's just so frustrating. It doesn't really work, I think, the way they wanted it to work, for me anyway.
No. To where we would have been like early on in chapter 2 of season 2, we would have seen him at the station. We would have seen Hopper like deal with Murray. Granted, in this episode we see him doing police work, but like I don't think we've seen him do any police work up to this point. It's just been hanging out with Joyce or dealing with the kids. And of course, this is also the scene where he asks Joyce to dinner again.
Yeah, you can see the confidence has swelled within him.
All of this stuff between Joyce and Hopper, though, like, it's very clear to me at least that she is trying to set boundaries and Hopper is just not respecting them. I mean, he does say, okay, we'll meet there. But, and then when he's like, I'm a little busy here, like, when Powell radios him, I don't know, there's just something like a little bit uncomfortable about it to me.
Hopper is not respecting any boundaries this season. He barely really respected boundaries before, even as, chief of police. But in this season, he bursts into Eleven's room more than once.
Mm-hmm.
He gets into it with the mayor. And of course, none of that would have been legal, let alone respecting boundaries. So he's not about that for anybody, it seems. Not this season.
I find myself thinking a lot about that scene between Hopper and Jonathan, actually, in season 1, where Heidi's observation was that Hopper doesn't go for the, like, you can talk to me, son. He's very emotionally intuitive with Jonathan. And I think with 11, it kind of makes sense because they are both such big, like, powerhouse kind of characters, but dealing with like talking to, I mean, I think Heidi made a good point about how romance and romantic love and love are like his Achilles heel, but I kind of feel like if you're going to establish that Hopper can do that in season 1, when does it go away? How are these two the same person?
Exactly. That's another one that's like we didn't really see a transition. One of the things about season 2, especially the beginning of season 2 that was so good is that you see people dealing with the trauma of season 1 and you see them trying to wrap their heads around it. You see Nancy struggling with what happened and coping with it in her own way. With Hopper, you can, I mean, sure, he's traumatized, but we don't see that transition. We don't see him coping. We see him derailing.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Powell does radio Hopper to be like, there's a protest over Starcourt Mall going on down here at Town Hall. You better like do your job and get down here. And on his way out, Hopper trips over the magnets. And that's when Joyce notices and kind of goes, this is odd. But from there, we swing over to the Hawkins Post. We see Nancy getting mocked some more. And she decides to make up an excuse to go investigate the diseased rats, pulling Jonathan along with her. As a photographer, do you cringe as hard as I do every time that door swings open?
Every time. Oh my God. Talk about respecting boundaries. Nancy keeps, and this, of course, gets brought up in their argument that they eventually have in the car, but Nancy keeps expecting the world of everyone around her and not returning anything. She keeps disrespecting Jonathan's boundaries. And he even says, Nancy, every time, the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, every time. I'm just like, oh my God, woman, you know how this works.
She's saying like, I'm not being respected for my work. It's like, she is not respecting his work. That is hours of work she might have just ruined.
Oh yes, when she said that, I like threw up my hands. I'm sitting on the couch, I throw up my hands and I'm just like, what do you think you are doing every time you open the dark room door?
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of surprised. I'm like, how come there isn't like around like a dark room door there though?
I was wondering that too, but then I realized my experience with dark rooms has purely been in academic settings. I have no idea if these office buildings in old, you know, a newspaper um, buildings that had newspaper offices in them, if they ever really set up their dark rooms to have doors like that. I have no idea. I think what they would have is maybe a light or something on the outside of the door. So when you go into the dark room, you flip the switch and a light goes on outside, and that indicates dark room work in progress. Please do not open door, something like that.
Everything we're seeing with Jonathan and Nancy is actually really great. Like, that's really frustrating, but it's frustrating in the way it's supposed to be because
Yes.
it is building their conflict. We are going somewhere with that. There's an intentionality behind those things.
Now, I did feel like that was maybe intended to just be a bit.
Yes.
But to me, it felt like more than that. It really felt like characterizing the relationship as her not respecting certain boundaries that he sets. The bit itself didn't really land with me, but I liked the rest of it.
Like, all their stuff feels very, I mean, apart from like the little bombastic and over the top stuff that we see when like, be careful, Nancy Drew. Like, I stand by what I said last episode. But apart from that, that all feels like Stranger Things.
Yeah, and totally, the sexism in The Office is really over the top and overdone, and like you guys said, it feels like it was written by somebody who's maybe not experienced it themselves. They're just they just want it to be really over the top. But something I did like was the way that Tom called Nancy sweetheart. That is realistic. That is how it happens. So he actually seemed like maybe one of the more reasonable assholes in this office. He's not outright disrespecting her because honestly, he doesn't probably care that much. He's got other shit to take care of.
Yeah.
But he calls her sweetheart like that. It's that dismissive way. That is how it happens. So that I thought was really well done.
Yeah, agreed. Nancy and Jonathan, she's like, well, then we'll never have to work at this shithole again, seeding that like she doesn't have the perspective that Jonathan does about it. And then that's when we swing over to one of my favorite scenes, actually, which is when Dustin arrives at Scoops Ahoy.
Oh my God, yes. I love Steve and Dustin so much together.
But I actually really love that first little interaction, even the like, I'm Dustin, I'm Robin. And Dustin proceeds to fill Steve in on about Susie and how the others, ditched him, which is only partially true.
I have a question for you. Did you at any point think that Susie wasn't real, that he was making her up?
100%.
Really?
And I was mad about it. I felt like the show was making fun of Dustin. I was like, why are you doing this? Why are you making everyone treat him this way? I don't like that. I love Dustin. I feel like I said it last episode as well. I think Dustin is another MVP of this season. I mean, even Steve's reaction to him in this scene of like, oh, that's great. Cool.
Right, and he says later something to Robin, I think, along the lines of, "I'm not convinced that she's real," or, so, yeah, I just thought it was funny because maybe the first time Dustin mentioned Susie, I was like, "Is he making up a girlfriend?" But honestly, I was like, he's not gonna hike up that gigantic hill and set up that radio if he doesn't actually have somebody he's trying to reach.
That's true.
So I was actually pretty invested, like, "Oh, he totally has a girlfriend, I buy that."
I think I was more worried that he was gonna be humiliated, but
Yeah, and if you have already had your trust eroded a little bit by other things happening in the series and you start to get worried that the bad things that you don't wanna happen are gonna happen, yeah, I get that.
in hindsight, though, it is very clear that Susie is real because Dustin is never concerned compared to, like, the way that he was about Dart in season 2. It's like he is totally confident and totally secure in the knowledge that Susie is real. So, it makes absolutely all of the sense that she is real.
I'm so happy for him and
I
to have
know!
his girlfriend. The conversation between Dustin and Steve, where Dustin's explaining that he intercepted a secret Russian communication. And Steve says, "Well, what does that mean?" And Dustin replies with, "It means, Steve, we could be heroes." And I had a moment on rewatch, of course, because of the use of the Heroes cover by Peter Gabriel that's used twice in the series. And I just was brought up short because I was thinking about that song. I mean, it's very, very striking the way that they use it. And the lyrics, of course, are "We could be heroes." And Justin says it in this episode at the beginning of this adventure. And he says it in such an optimistic, enthusiastic way. He is looking forward to this adventure. He is so intrigued by this. And the contrast is so heartbreaking between the beginning of the adventure and the end when you have experienced what it maybe is kind of like to actually be a hero. It's the Sam Gamgee speech, right? Where it's like we think of heroes as one thing when we're kids, and then we grow up and realize that life is messy and that, bad things happen and you experience grief and sacrifice and loss. And so I love that they use that line here to give us that contrast. And especially, it does tie in with the theme of change and with growing up because you have to start from a place of innocence, naivety. And I think that's what this line did for me. He says it so optimistically and innocently.
Yeah, that's a beautiful observation. I had not thought about any of that, but that's really insightful.
Yeah, that reached out and like smacked me across the nose.
That's awesome. That is followed by Elle showing up at Max's house. And after an awkward greeting, they confer over Mike's behavior and over boyfriend's behavior in general, intercut with Mike and Lucas conferring over the entire situation. While Will prepares the D&D board in the background, him setting up the D&D board and being like, "Can we play D&D now?" Like,
I felt that in my soul.
yeah, me too. Yeah. And Max advises Elle to give Mike the cold shoulder unless he explains himself otherwise. Dump him. I love that this introduction between the two of them, like, they don't waste any time on that. They're just like, nope, we're just gonna move right past it. We're not gonna waste time on them not liking each other. And then both parties take off for Starcourt. The boys to try and fix the situation, the girls to have some fun. And in spite of some things I'm gonna say in a minute or two, I actually really do like the line, "There's more to life than stupid boys."
Yeah, no, Max, definitely. I appreciate her influence as a character and for just to help Elle grow a little bit.
Yeah, after they head off to the mall, though, that's where we go over to the pool, and Karen finds Billy in a supply room, and he's not looking too good. The first time through, man, I don't know how it struck you, but when he imagines killing her with the sound of the rats in the background, which I thought was a nice touch, I totally fell for it. When they revealed that it was just him imagining it, was like, okay, that makes more sense. But in the moment, they really had me.
No, me too. I was like, "Oh shit, they killed Karen. What the hell?"
And then, of course, he tells her to stay away from him, and that I think is probably the first like real sign of humanity from him. As Heidi pointed out last episode, like, he does see her as a human being, and so he knows enough of what's happening to him that there's still some humanity left in him. He's not completely taken over yet, but he's able to say, like, stay away. And that actually was really nicely nuanced. You can see how Karen would read that as, I'm angry with you. That double meaning is really believable. I buy that.
Yeah, I was really wondering this whole scene. Did he say that to her to protect her? And I think the answer is yes. I think he really wanted her to stay away from him because he knows that he's dangerous now. And of course, this scene is also the first inkling, I think, that we get that there are some weird things happening with chemicals. with these possessed people because we see him in a chemical room and he puts down a bottle of bleach on the shelf and you're just kind of like, what was he doing with that? Like,
I didn't even notice that.
oh yeah, and yeah,
Oh,
he
wow,
so
okay.
now on rewatch, I was like, "Oh, he was drinking bleach." Like, "Oh my god, gross." But, like,
Yikes.
the first time I saw that, I did see him do that, and I just kinda thought, "Okay, well, he's just putting it on the shelf or whatever."
Yeah, I totally missed that. Wow.
I did find his expression during that scene to be so unreadable. I could not guess what was going on in his head, and of course, we're still confused about whether what's happening to him. Is he possessed? Is this a doppelganger? What exactly is going on? So it was so confusing. So confusing, his expression and the cutting and everything.
Yeah, I agree. And of course that is followed by him going outside and getting the burn,
Yeah.
which of course we know he likes it cold. Of course, we leave that to go back to Scoops Ahoy, where Erica and Robin face off over ice cream samples.
I love Erica so much. I'm so glad she became more of a regular in this season.
Yeah, me too.
And I love the dynamic that she adds to the whole group too.
In the back room, Steve and Dustin are not very covertly trying to decode the recording, and that's why Robin like bursts in and is like, I want in. And you go back out and sling ice cream for a while. And I like that they drop in the note that Steve has already picked up on the music, that he's noticed the music. Of course, after that, Nancy and Jonathan talk to Mrs. Driscoll about the rats and that they've eaten through the fertilizer to, the thing about the chemicals,
Gross.
and that she's trapped one of the rats.
I love the casting for Mrs. Driscoll. I think she's great. And
Mhm.
I think it just everything about the house, it just lends the, creepy vibe. It's this old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I mean, what is not creepy about that?
And at the same time, it's not super like overstated. Like they don't play the upside down music like right when they walk in. Like it's not overdone. And actually that was really really nice.
Important too, because Nancy is still at a stage where she's not 100% sure that she is right. For all that she is adamant when she says so out loud that she is right, I think she's still kind of like trying to find the story and trying to find what's going on. So the fact that there isn't something overtly ominous, that's
Mhm.
probably on purpose, and that works for her and her doubts.
Yeah. We see the Terminator make a reappearance at town hall when he walks past Hopper, who is waiting to talk to Mayor Larry Klein. And I remember again being like, okay, cool. We're going to get some answers about the Terminator soon, maybe, hopefully.
I did recognize the back of his head right away.
Yeah. And we'll put a pin in that. And then we get Carrie Elwes.
I love him so much in this. Oh my god. He was a highlight of this season for me. Just incredible. Amazing. I really haven't seen him in very many things. Most recently, we watched through the TV show Psych, just kind of
Mm,
had it on, and he's got a recurring role in that, which is kind of goofy. And so this actually felt the kind of like that for me. It was so good. He's so good in this season and in this show. And of course, in this whole scene, what I noticed in this scene was the lighting, how it seemed very deliberately behind Carrie Elwes, and he was in shadow. His face was in shadow pretty much the entire scene, and
mhm.
Hopper had the light blaring in his face. And yeah, I think that felt like a very deliberate choice.
Yeah. When Elle and Max get to the mall, Elle is worried about how many people, and Max goes, "You have superpowers, like, don't worry," and then in they go. I actually do kinda like that because I do think that is actually seeding for the argument between Mike and Max that happens later. And even though I do think it's a little bit flippant, that is actually them seeding something really well, and that's one of the first things I think among this group of characters that they did actually seed really well because it does come back up later in a really,
Mhm.
really good way.
I'm so happy for Elle. Like, whatever my other feelings are about what's going on, I'm so happy for her to get to go to the mall. That scene where she's trying on clothes is so important for her character, and I really do enjoy it, and I enjoy her trying to figure out what she actually likes, and I like that they treated that with respect. It's so easy to be like, "Oh, teenage girls and whatever teenage girls like isn't cool and fashion is shallow." But like fashion and clothes can be so important when you're trying to discover your own identity. And that's so important with Elle, who has been so repressed her whole life. And even now is still that way. You know, Hopper is not Dr. Brenner, but he's not like exactly letting her thrive, you know?
Right.
So I do love that for her. And of course she tries on high heels and falls down at one point, which is another little nod to them starting to grow up. They're starting to become adults, or they will soon.
There's a makeover for Elle in every season. Like in the first season, it's like we have to kind of hide you, we have to camouflage you. And then in the second season, it's her getting to try on being a badass. Both of which I think they make total sense contextually, but I love the fact that when Max says, not Hopper, not Mike, this is the first time someone says to her, what do you want? It's not about what I want or what they want. It's what do you like? And I actually that's a Bechdel-Wallace pass. Also, for the listeners, for anyone who doesn't know, the Bechdel-Wallace test is if you have two or more female characters in a scene that speak to each other, they talk about or in reference to something other than a man. And the reason why that's important from like a feminist lens is because it's amazing how often that does not happen.
Just, yeah, amazing.
You also said the thing about like, you know, the trying on the shoes, and that's a really interesting perspective because you could also look at it the inverse of it where it's like Ella's kind of just getting to be a kid. Like that whole sequence. Like I do think that montage goes, the Material Girls montage, I think it goes on a little too long. It's a little long, but I like the idea of it. I enjoy it for the most part because it's her getting to just be a young girl for the first time.
Now, do they intercut that with the boys shopping too, right?
Yeah.
I thought that that went on a little bit long because we got yet another gag of somebody getting sprayed in the eyes
Yep.
with something, and it's like, guys, you had a whole entire mall to play with, and that's the gag you came up with. Like, sure you wanted a silly comedic beat. These little young boys are trying to shop. Let's do something kind of goofy, and you had to repeat a gag. Like, really?
That almost has the vibe of like they may have let the boys improv a little bit.
Maybe.
And so we see Joyce abandon her work and seek out help from Mr. Clark.
The coolest guy in Hawkins, Indiana. He's in his garage painting miniature figurines and listening to Weird Al. He has goals.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like the show never makes fun of him. Like nothing about what he's doing feels like they're making fun of him, and I really appreciate that.
Yes, like, you can it's so easy to be, like, painting miniatures and listening to Weird Al and hanging out in your garage is so nerdy. Like, we've seen that so many times in so many different ways, and they don't do that here. He is smart, and he's talented, and he is respected by us, as well as, like, Joyce and the kids and whoever else, you know, he comes across in the show. I love it, and I'm really glad I watched this with Adam because I would not have picked up on the Weird Al thing without him. He heard that immediately. I was like, "Oh, my Sharona. Okay, got it." He's like, "No, no, no. You listen to the words. Listen, watch, read the captions. That's not what's happening here."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Meanwhile, Nancy makes phone calls while Jonathan tries to get the photo of the rat, and he starts to like intuitively pick up on the fact that there's something really wrong with it, but they leave before they can actually see it explode and go,
Yeah, I really thought it was gonna blow up in Jonathan's face. I was ready for that to happen. Oh my god. Another fun little note is that Mrs. Driscoll comes down and is like, "Oh, I just thought it had rabies." And, like, she says that so flippantly. And as somebody who's worked with wildlife, a rat having rabies is very rare. A rat being reported with rabies has happened, like, 8 times in the US since 1979. And rabies cases in general, you're gonna hear about it in your local news if it happens within a couple counties of you. It's a big deal, even if you live in an area where rabies is relatively common. It's actually a very big deal, and it is a very big news story. Even if it's what we call rabies vector species, which are species that are known for getting rabies more often like raccoons. Even if a couple counties over from you, they catch a raccoon that tests positive for rabies, that will make your local news. That's important. So it's funny to me that they're like, "Oh, it's just a rat with rabies," as if that isn't a news story in and of itself. Now, this is the mid 80s. I'm not 100% sure, of course, what everybody in general knows about rabies and wildlife in general, but that's, you know, nowadays that would be a big deal. So that, hey, that's a news story in and of itself, Nancy.
yeah. This is when we get more of Billy's flashback and we get the answer to the question, if you can call it an answer, while he continues to struggle in the sunlight.
He says, "What do you want?" And he says something like, "To build." "To build what?" Or something. "You'll see." I forget the exact words, but we still don't know what the hell that any of that conversation was about. We know what it meant to build, but the way it said it, it didn't make any sense.
It makes me wonder, like, what was the benefit of holding off on that? Because the cold open is so short. Would it have hurt us to have gotten that response right at the top? Because the only thing I can think that it would directly affect would be when the rat explodes later, and then you see the little piece of goo, like, scurrying across the floor. So we know that there's something about building. Would that have really affected our experience? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Considering that we find that out in the episode anyway, I don't know. It, like, And that's when he goes into the shower, sees the burn getting worse, and he's interrupted by Heather, who asks if he's hurt, but all he hears is "take me to him." When Will says, "Can we please play D&D now?" I find that I really wish that he was with Dustin.
Will doesn't have a place with the rest of the boys because they didn't write it that way. They wrote him as the missing kid. So there was a full ensemble of kids. Will serves as a plot device almost for people like Joyce and motivation for Joyce and to maybe a lesser degree to Mike because they are supposed to be best friends and Will's disappearance of course hit Mike really hard. But after he's found, it's kind of like, oh, he's back in the group, but we don't really have the dynamic with him. We don't really understand where to take that dynamic, and that continues into this season. There are some things that I think that work about having somebody want to do one thing and other people in the group wanting to do something else. It's just, I don't know. Will never really seems to fit back in.
I agree with you because the quote that I read from Sean Levy in the beginning of last episode about like this, if season 2 was all about the desire for normalcy, season 3 is about change. I think Will is still there. He's still trying to say like, I just want something of what I've missed, what I've had to go without, and and he wants something dependable. I think Will actually would have fit in with Scoops Ahoy.
I'm not 100% sure that Will would be on board for their little adventure because of the desire for normalcy that he might have. So that really could have gone either way. I guess the writers could have written it either way depending on where they wanted him to go.
That's a good point. I do think though that if Will had said like I'm unhappy, I don't based on the way they characterized Dustin this season, I don't think he'd have been as cold as Mike was. But that's next episode. I'm jumping ahead. But but at Skips Ahoy they figure out the first sentence of the code, that's thrilling. The week is long.
I love all of their dynamic. It's so good.
Yeah.
I love this group.
Okay, so because that's followed by the girls and boys finally crossing paths. And the resulting fight that ensues culminates in 11 dumping Mike's ass.
So something that I really loved about this exchange was when Mike asks, "What are you doing here?" I just love the way Millie Bobby Brown says, "Shopping." It's so funny. It's so like sassy and you can tell that she's been thinking about herself as her own individual now more. It's so good.
Another line delivery that I like of hers is the way that she says, "Why do you lie?"
Yeah, she's so good at delivering most of her lines anyway, but yeah, that was a good one. But as for the scene as a whole, how did things land for you?
I hate this scene.
What do you hate about it?
This is probably the quintessential example for me of things where this is all, I think, intended to be payoff for things that we don't see set up. There are pieces of things that are just not connected. I don't get why Mike doesn't just confess here. It doesn't make sense to me. I hate the line, "I dump your ass." Not the line itself, but it's like, does she understand what she's actually doing? And especially considering like how much like kind of parroting Elle does over the course of all 3 seasons, I don't think she understands the full weight of what she's done. And I don't know if that's intentional or not. But I just find that like this is what we waited 2 seasons for. This angst between Mike and Elle for them to just break up. The scene does not feel satisfying to me. And I don't like that in order to make her feel empowered and Max, it has to come at the cost of tearing down Mike and Lucas and making them look terrible. I also don't like that this moment is supposed to feel joyful. Apart from the "why do you lie" moment, which is why I like that line so much, and why I guess we're supposed to not think that she knows what she's saying, is because it's like she has no feeling of sadness over this.
The words themselves and the way it's said kind of sound like she doesn't know what she's really doing. And that kind of bugged me too.
And I feel like something about the first 2 seasons that were so good was there's so much set up and payoff. because Mike's whole thing of like, what are you doing here? There's too many people here. Again, was not established in this season, and it could have been very, very easily.
One other note about this scene that we kind of relates to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago is where's Will in this scene? He's standing behind Mike and Lucas, kind of looking like, why is he even there? Like he's doing absolutely nothing and he's not even up there with his friends. He doesn't even really look interested. Like he is looking towards them, but it's like I don't know. He wasn't even there, mentally.
I think part of what I struggle with this moment, and I can cop to this, is that adolescent romance was not something that is part of my experience. I did not date in middle school, let alone high school, let alone middle school.
Yeah, me either.
So in a way, some of this feels just really inaccessible to me. So I can also admit that I can't relate to this. And a few years at this time period makes a big difference. But if you think about the way they handled the teenage angst between Nancy, Steve, and Barb, there's a level of nuance and subtlety in that arc that is just not present here. And there's a through line there. Everything leads back to the Demogorgon. And granted, that had its own problems that I stand by when Heidi and I talked about it in season 1. But that stuff never felt inaccessible to me. If in fact, very little in this whole series has ever felt totally inaccessible and totally unrelatable. Even if there's something that isn't relevant to my life, majority of the time things feel at least understandable, if not relatable. And this is just, this is galaxies away. Like this just doesn't seem to mesh very well to me with like even the other stuff that's happening. Like this balances out with the stuff with Hopper in the restaurant, which we'll get to in a moment. But like the stuff with Nancy and Jonathan, that feels like a different show.
Yeah. I do like that later, I think this is in the next episode, she looks a little down when Max mentions ex-boyfriend, and I like that she's starting to realize the weight of what she did, but it is kinda just out of left field, like so many things.
I mean, I have been enjoying more about these episodes than I had expected to, but this is actually a scene that I feel like gets worse and worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can appreciate that they wanted to have conflict between Elle and Mike. Maybe I don't know if I'd been writing it. I don't know if I would have gone in that direction, but I think that's a valid direction to go in. But yeah, the way that they did it, not sure I'm on board with this.
Yeah. Plus, I also think it's important to note that I think Max is probably still carrying a lot of animosity towards Mike. This is not, we never see any of this necessarily in this is me reading tea leaves, as Heidi would say. And I'm not bothered by this. I actually kind of like the idea of this, that Max is still mad, kind of not unlike the way that Mike might still be mad at Hopper. He treated her pretty terribly last season. I think it's very plausible that she might be really happy to see him kind of get pegged a little bit, like, and taken down. But I also think that if that is translating to Elle, I don't know that I like that.
Or maybe they've been hanging out for long enough that they're all friends now and they don't have this animosity towards each other, in which case, why would she be, acting quite this way? They've been so successful in seasons 1 and 2 at managing a large ensemble and having the different web of people connected in interesting ways and yet still growing individual characters. And that is definitely a place where we falter in this season. And I think this scene is probably one of the biggest examples of that. The ensemble doesn't really jive.
It's such a bummer to come out of that awesome montage with her and with Max and Elle becoming friends, to have this be the culmination of that. I get very turned off by how joyful that moment is on the bus.
Yeah.
I love that image. Like, I've seen fan art of that image, and I actually really like it out of context. I love the idea of Max and Elle as, like, best friends. I think that's fantastic. But it's at the expense yeah, it
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Totally.
Meanwhile, at Town Hall, Hopper arrests the protesters just in time for Flo to bring him a cutting-edge shirt for his non-date.
So weird.
And I really feel for Powell in this moment, because he's like, seriously, dude? And Hopper gets to the restaurant, which has a live string quartet.
Does this place seem like Joyce and or Hopper's taste? Like even before he mispronounces Chianti, I'm like, why does he want to be here? He just thinks this is expected of him. Like he has to wine and dine the woman that he fancies, even if it's not a date. That was irritating to see from him.
Yeah. And of course, Joyce doesn't show up because she's still over at Scott's, learning about the magnetic fields. One of the things that I think is actually really brilliant about Mr. Clark or Scott Clark, he basically fills the role of like expositing information. And he does it with so much flair, I guess. I don't know what the right word would be, but every time he does that exposition dump, it's very engaging.
The character is a natural teacher. Clearly,
Yes.
he's in the right profession. Yeah, he's obviously that trope of the science teacher that gives them the information they need without knowing it, but they do it really well, and I love it. And I love him being in his garage. I think that's awesome. Randy Havens.
Shout out to him for performing that character so well. Heidi said in season 1 that it would be cool if they brought him into the fold. And, again, the cast is so enormous, but I would not be mad about it. Or if, like, maybe at the end of, like, season 5, someone says, we should probably tell Mr. Clark. And then, like, he says, oh, I've known all along. Or like,
no, if they brought Mr. Clark into the fold, they would be too powerful.
That's true. Team Scoops Ahoy reviews the finished translation before closing up for the night, and they walk through the empty mall, discussing the super secret spy code, determining that the message is indeed probably evil Russians, trademark. And Dustin and Robin keep walking while Steve realizes that he knows where the music is from, the Indiana Flyer ride.
Because nowhere else in the entire world do they play Daisy Bell in a
I
carnival
know.
ride.
I know.
This is one of my biggest moments of the season where I'm like, the suspension of disbelief is going in overtime with this one. Are you kidding me? It's
Yeah.
coming from here. This is the only horse in the world that plays this song. And therefore, they must be broadcasting from here, which doesn't make sense because they're broadcasting from underground or whatever. Like, why would the song be in the broadcast? I don't understand. I'm so confused on this one. I'm really happy that Steve got to have a moment of brilliance, but
It's ridiculous because they try to like avoid that, I think, by saying that like how do we know it's from here? Why not, and they're like, well, Indiana Flyer. It's like, it's not about the ride, it's about the song. So I think they try to like cover up for that, but it's like, no, that's not enough.
not by a long shot.
I mean, the code ends up being about Starcourt's, the court itself, but
And also, why would Robin not be the one to pick up on that, as she described herself earlier in the episode as really good at hearing and listening to things and being able to hear something and translate it and remember it. Well, I mean, again, glad Steve got his moment, but it would make more sense for that to have been Robin. Maybe Robin should have picked this up, and maybe Steve could have figured out the actual meaning of the recording. I don't know, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm really glad that she did because she's awesome and I love her too. But
Yeah, it's far-fetched for sure. We swing back over to Enzo's, where Hopper is drowning his sorrows in breadsticks, and
Chianti.
over the fact that Joyce seems to have stood him up. And like, on the one hand, I don't blame him, but on the other hand, I think the reaction is
Over the top again.
like, I would have rather have seen him like get up and then maybe we see him like have a bunch of beers when he gets back to his to the cabin or something. Like, that feels more like what Hopper would do to me. But the fact that he like sloppily gets up and like knocks into the Terminator who's sitting at the bar on his way out, again, like, I get we needed that beat for exposition, and it really feels like, or for plot, but I feel like that's the only reason that it happened.
Yeah.
Because again, it's like, it just feels like they didn't think it through, but
And he, of course, on his way out, he says, I can do what I want. I'm the chief of police.
yeah. And that's a line that I do not think has aged well at all.
No, no. Bad. No.
I mean, it's not like that line would have landed comfortably at any point, but especially now, like in
Yeah,
2022, like, yikes.
absolutely. I do think it's funny that Grigory is shadowing Hopper already.
The Terminator?
The Terminator Grigory. He is already shadowing Hopper. I don't really understand.
Yeah, I don't either. My only memory was that it's because he's like just we just need to establish that he's there.
That he's this present ominous figure, but with no actual reason. I don't understand. I still don't understand why he was there. Hopper wasn't doing anything that they would have cared about before then, I don't think.
Other than the fact that he is the chief of police, and that may be the only as far as it goes.
And I guess we don't really know for sure what the Russians know about the details of what happened in Hawkins. We know that they know about the gate, but did they know that the chief of police of Hawkins, Indiana knows about all the things and is somebody interesting to watch? We don't know.
But do they know about the gate?
Well, why are they there?
We don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
That's the thing. We never find out.
That is true. That's a whole other thing about this season is that there are questions about the Russians and how they were able to build this whole entire thing underground. Like Starcourt Mall wouldn't have covered all of that up. It just wouldn't. So,
Mm-mm. The thing that cracks me up is that as I clarified this with Heidi back in season 1, I'm like, Brenner was not trying to find the Upside Down. Brenner was trying to spy on the Russians.
oh,
The
was
upside the
he?
gate Yes, the gate into the Upside Down was a side effect of him frightening Elle. She's in the astral plane spying on the Russian guy, and then she finds the Demogorgon and then opens the gate because she gets scared. Brenner was never intending to find another world. He was he was experimenting on the kids, but that was ultimately to spy on Russians. So, yeah, it's like why are they even there?
Yeah.
But the episode concludes with Billy returning, Billy in air quotes, returning to the barn, bringing with him an unconscious and tied up Heather.
Really creepy seeing her in the trunk like that. I thought she was dead. And I was like, wow, that was a level of darkness seeing the dead girl in the trunk. I wasn't expecting. It was very jarring, even for a show that has horror elements. That was very jarring.
Yeah, and then he brings her inside and delivers her to whatever is waiting in the basement.
Gross.
And of course, the metaphor here is not subtle. And as the camera lingers on Billy while off screen Heather screams. Yeah, this is really, really uncomfortable, really gross, and I'm not sure that I care if it's supposed to be those things because this is really dark. This is like on the same level to me as dark as like the bit at the end of I think chapter 5 Dig Dug when Will is experiencing being burned alive. It doesn't visually look that sinister, especially because the camera is on Billy, but what they're implying, it's dark. It's dark.
Yeah.
And I especially because it's a metaphor for something that actually is real. And that's where the episode concludes. So, a really dark beat.
Which contrasts well with the spectacle of the mall. And I think that's something they were going for. You know, we really wanted those bright, happy, colorful moments to contrast with the horror.
That's true.
That, at least, is something they were trying to do. But yeah, it was really unsettling.
Yeah. So with that, final thoughts?
For me, season 1 was about people taking care of each other, period. Like families, romantic partners, friends, siblings. It was so strong. You know, we're going to take care of each other no matter what, and no, in the face of all this danger. And season 2 was about coming together after grief, after trauma, trying to live your lives normally. And season 3 is it is a little dissonant. I do agree with you guys. It's dissonant to those other seasons. We've already done the thing where we've tried to move on from trauma and have normal lives. So we're not doing that again, which is like, no, you guys, I think they maybe should have focused on that a little bit more because that's ongoing. That's going to be the rest of their lives. And I
Mhm.
would have appreciated seeing a little bit more out of that, especially with Hopper, who's obviously been through some shit even before all this, not even with his daughter. Like, maybe we'll see more of that in season 4 with Vietnam. But he is just so unhinged that it would have been, I think, maybe not nice. Nice isn't the right word, but more effective, more, or just better
Mhm. Mhm.
somehow for us to see that dealing with trauma, trying to live with trauma. It doesn't, I don't know if they thought that that would just be boring, but I don't think it would have been. During this episode, I really had a thought of, man, this show is at this point interesting enough without the supernatural stuff. We're really invested in these characters. They're awesome and awful in their own ways, and they are a really cool ensemble, even if there wasn't all the supernatural stuff. And we kind of are robbed of Billy being the human antagonist. He is an antagonist, but it's not really Billy after episode 1.
Part of what's written in the book is that they wanted to lighten things up. And I don't know if that's them paraphrasing something that the Duffer Brothers or Sean Levy had said, but but that idea, I'm kind of like, but that's kind of what we're here for. And I actually think what you're saying about, I think it being more effective, that's actually, that nails it, because it takes away for me from the gravitas from the first seasons.
That's a good way of putting it. As I've said, I'm not in the camp of I hate the colors and the brightness. But yeah, I definitely think there are some other things that would have been more effective. And I just recently rewatched the entire series and was reminded of how strong the very first episode is. It's so good. And it's so good for so many reasons. And one of them is the overall tone and just everything ties together so well, and we're deviating a bit from that. I'm trying to roll with it. I think I'm trying to enjoy it, but it isn't as effortless, you know.
Believe it or not, I am too. I promise. I said all the stuff that I said about the breakup bit and about the bright colors and everything, but I think a really strong example of like how they actually could have made that work, and where I think consistency is actually something they could have done, is actually that scene in the back room at Scoops Ahoy, where the color palette is brighter. It's far more comedic between Steve, Dustin, and Robin. It's more lighthearted. Dustin has obviously already talked about Susie quite a lot, so he's evolving. But Dustin is still Dustin. Steve is still Steve. They leaned into the relationship that they formed last season. So the tone is different, but it's consistent. It still feels like them. And that's one of the reasons why I'm like, you clearly know how to do that. So to some degree, there was a conscious choice to take those relationships where they did. I just think that one sequence and one group is much stronger than the other. I know that this period of adolescence, this shift from childhood to adolescence, is hard. It's a hard thing to get right. So in a way, I do cut them a little bit of slack. And again, the ideas are good. I just think it kind of trips. It trips hard on execution.
Yeah.
As Heidi said about a couple things in season 1, I know you can do better.
Absolutely.
I think I'm being a little bit harsher, but so I appreciate your your level of being a little bit nicer than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
So then I guess, with that said, that's going to conclude our contemplation on chapter 2, the mall rats. Thank you so much for doing this, for joining me for this episode.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's so much fun. I love this. It's been really cool. We haven't gotten to talk about film and stuff in a really long time. We used to do this a lot, and so this has been really super fun.
Yes, it has. It's been a blast, and hopefully maybe you can come back again.
I sure hope so. That'd be so much fun. Yes, thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. If you've got comments, questions, thoughts, want to straighten us out somehow, tell us we're wrong, join the conversation. We're on Instagram and Facebook as @coffeeandcontemplationpod and TikTok as @coffeeinhawkins. Like, share, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts, and please consider leaving us a review.
Thanks for listening.
Over and out. You and I are probably closer in age to Karen as a character than any of the other characters, so I think that's one reason why we might...
That's true. There aren't any characters in this show that are our age, so it's like we can't really relate to the kids very much, and we certainly can't relate to the parents, but we might be a little closer. I don't know. Not to date ourselves.